Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the Lifting the Veil podcast with your host, myself, Adrienne, LaPier Integrative Healing Coach. Thanks for joining me this week for soul healing conversations, guest topics that support you in unveiling the true nature of your consciousness so you can embrace your destiny and not suffer your fate. If you hear something today that resonates with you, please don't forget to like, share, or comment, as it supports the growth and reach of this podcast by increasing our listenership, which makes this whole endeavor possible. In the meantime, please sit back, relax, and get ready to hear this week's episode for part 2 of my conversation with Brandon LaPier, psychic empath, mystic and healer, where we cover lots of ground, everything from entities in the context of Wetiko, also referred to as the mind virus, to the rebalancing of the divine masculine and the divine feminine. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of the Lifting the Veil podcast with myself, your host, Adrienne Lopez, the Integrative Healing Coach. And today I am pleased to have Brandon LaPier back for part 2 of our conversation, all things psychic, empathic, intuitive. And today we're going to be talking about specifically some topics around the divine masculine, the divine feminine, and the mind virus, also known as Wetiko. So we'll be digging into that in just a moment. I'm so glad that Brandon has agreed to return to continue our awesome conversation. So thank you for being here, Brandon.
Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, it's such a pleasure. I just want to tell our listeners a little bit about you if they did not watch our first episode. Brandon is an incredible psychic empath, mystic, and healer. He has had mystical, paranormal, and ET experiences his whole life. These experiences have led him to discover and understand his gifts and ultimately his personal connection to Creator. He uses his connection to help people release trauma, negative emotions, and false beliefs while helping them connect to greater parts of themselves. So that's just a little tiny bit about what Brandon does, the short version. So today I was curious. I actually asked you to be on this podcast because I had heard like a round table that you've been doing with a group of gentlemen. And you had been talking about the power of entities. So I'm super curious about that topic, and I know a lot of people are, because people are like, there's fear around it. First of all, like, what's an entity, and do I have one? And so today I thought maybe we could just start with that and help maybe our listeners make a little bit more sense of what an entity is and how they function and how we can support ourselves to be free of them and that sort of thing. So I'd love to hear your take, however you want to dive in.
Well, I think first we'll define entity. So entity, like the dictionary definition, is basically something that exists apart from other things. So something with beingness, or you consider it something with consciousness. So it's its own thing. So entities aren't necessarily a bad thing in themselves, but it's when we say we have entities, that's when it's the concern. So something that exists apart from us, within us.
Yeah.
So, but that's not the only way that we can be affected by things outside of ourselves. So even people that are more psychically aware can have things get into their field, and I've seen this, and they'll do it through cords. And so there'll be like little things that come into our field and can siphon off energy, and they can be on the outside of your aura too. So it's not just something within the person. If they're in the body, that means they have holes in their aura, holes in their field. And there's lots of ways that this can come in. So we talked a little bit about Wetiko before.
Yeah.
And Wetiko essentially like is a Native American word for a cannibalistic spirit. So it's a mind virus, a cannibalistic spirit. It's something that is very selfish in nature. So greed. Um,
Well, you had mentioned the seven deadly sins earlier.
yes,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
seven deadly sins. So we can tie that into Wetiko. So
Mm-hmm.
how though does that tie in? So every one of those is essentially a very selfish, self-centered thing that is completely focused on your own desires, your own insatiable desires sometimes. And when we think about this as far as how is this aligned to our greater spirit, and they say deadly sins, but it's not really something that's going to be eternal damnation and hellfire. That's not really what it is. If you look at the original definition of sin, it's missing the mark.
Yeah.
But what is it missing? It's missing our own internal alignment to our greater self.
Yeah.
So if you are aligned to that greater self, are you going to be lustful for somebody that's not good for you? You
Yeah.
know, are you going to be lustful just for anybody for the physical package when your soul is actually crying out for love and connection? No, but you're seeking that, but you're seeking it from a different place. And lots of people don't even know that's what they're seeking. Greed, well, greed is an easy one because when you are aligned to yourself, you know that that you everything can be given from creator. So
Yeah.
there's no need to hoard or get more. And it, again, it's just that insatiable desire because people just who have that form of Wetiko, it
Mm-hmm.
continuously builds and builds and builds, and they just want more and more and more until they figure out at some point in their life, sometimes, that it's not really filling what they're trying to fill. And it's that hole within themselves.
Yeah. And as you're speaking, I'm getting like some interesting clarity on, this animal body that we have, right? The lower three chakras. When we're just operating from there, it's super easy to be focused just on the material world and possessions. But I also see how that like got connected to like the hell realm in a way, because when you're just living on the materialistic level and you're disconnected from spirit, um, the only way of connecting is through the outside world and through trying to possess and own and consume. So I can see how that got all connected, although um, somehow our body got demonized in the process, like being in the physical body.
Now, what do you mean by being in the physical body got
Well, that
demonized?
it's sinful.
Oh,
Yeah.
sinful to have sexual desire, say? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, for example, like that was
Yeah,
like the most prominent, like the body's sinful, you can't trust the body, and all of that. Hmm.
yeah. And see, that's where the balance between the two comes in because you have to recognize the naturalness of the body and what the body wants. And
Yeah.
this is part of the reason why people who go through very traumatic sexual trauma sometimes get very conflicted within themselves because the body felt good when they were getting molested.
Yeah.
You know, the body has natural tendencies to respond to certain things, and then they felt horrible about the way they felt.
Yeah.
So there's this very conflicting thing there. So where if you had the upper chakras open, you know, you would see that this is a body, like it's a natural thing, and we could release the trauma. But
Yeah.
that's the conflict that people have, and that's why they have that. So there is a balance there. And then when you combine these things, the upper and lower, that's where the wisdom comes in. So it's acceptance, it's love, and it's wisdom with all of those things.
Yeah. And it's also like creates the taboo and the forbidden, like don't go there, don't do that. And you're like, well, that's like telling a little kid not to not to push that button or something, It's like almost like set
Yeah,
up to create like this overreaction to like, not being allowed or um to like be in your own body and be in a sovereign relationship to that.
I think it's much more helpful to describe what happens when people do that. It's the whys, not the fear. Because when you go into the fear and people go through whatever they go through, like, well,
Yeah.
obviously it's not true. They're resisting that. They're resisting all the bullshit that they smell.
Yeah. Like,
And then they push everything away,
yeah.
which is part of the reason all the lies and the manipulation we had and all the religious stuff is
Yeah.
why we have this prevalence today of people going the other direction and all the demonology stuff that we have, which is not good. It's very bad for people. You know, they don't really see how it's bad for them, but that's more of that Wetiko coming in that then they begin to bring in and accept as their own. So Wetiko, to clarify, is basically it can be a thought that is not yours that comes in. Sometimes it's repetitive. It can be other ideas that you get from like the things that you're watching from other people around you. And then it comes frequently enough that people then begin to accept it. And then in the native understanding is when the people start to accept the Wetiko, that mind virus, that cannibalistic spirit, they become Wetiko.
Yeah.
So then they begin to act out in the embodiment of that thing that it was trying to come in.
It's so fascinating because I, I'm getting super clear just through my own studies and just talking to people and through my own training, as a hypnotherapist and working with spirit attachments and entities, and that they're impersonal. Like they're archetypal, they're impersonal, they're energies of a certain intent almost. And they don't have a host of their own, so they need people to act out their energy. And so I want to ask you a little bit about that, but before I do, or maybe you could go through this example that you were sharing in your men's group about this certain entity, and I was fascinated because it was like not only you that saw it, but others, like other people saw the exact same energy. So that's like, oh, it's like this, it's like its own level of, I want to say frequency, or its own dimension in a way, because we can't
Mm-hmm.
see it with our eyes, except this one.
Well, I saw it with my eyes.
Oh, okay. Well,
Yeah,
yeah. Most people, I
most
don't want
people
to say
don't.
most, because people have paranormal activity happens all the time for all types of people, and so I
I
don't
would
want to
say
say.
at this point in humanity's evolution,
Yeah,
it is accurate to say that most people don't see that.
yeah, okay.
Not that most people aren't
No,
capable
but
of
I
it.
mean, some people do, and they're just like, I can't.
Yeah,
They don't know who to tell or what to say because they don't believe what they saw.
yeah,
They think they imagined
yeah. So if you're out there and you're listening and you see strange shit, just believe it.
it. Believe it.
You can question it, but believe it.
Good advice. Good
Yeah.
advice.
So, yeah, but basically that was a porn entity. So I I used to be addicted to porn,
Yeah, you
and
and a lot of people. So,
yeah,
like,
and, and it was like I would just start watching it, and next thing I know, I'd be watching it for like many hours, and like, oh man, where did my time go? And one time I was sitting down and doing what I was doing,
yeah,
and
stuff.
I went to my room and I laid down and I looked up and I saw this big oblong. It looked kind of like a sea cucumber, but it was all black and tarry, and it had these spikes that would go out and it would shoot out of itself and it would hook people.
Yeah.
And it was just floating in the middle of my room when I was looking up. I'm like, oh, okay. And I knew right when I saw it what it was connected to, why it was there, what it was trying to do to me. I
Yeah.
was like, and so the other person I was talking to in the men's group, when I mentioned this to him, he said that he saw the same thing. So he had the same problem. You know, he was also addicted to porn, and he saw the same exact one. So
Well, I just want to
that's
before you go on, I just want to acknowledge you and thank you for sharing that because I think this is an issue for a lot of people. So I
Mm,
think talking about and sharing, like having the courage to share that is super important and powerful. So thank you for being willing to be vulnerable and to share that. So
yes.
go ahead. Sorry.
I think like something like sex addiction and porn addiction too is one of the especially rough ones because it's also a natural body function, right? And so
Yes,
like,
it sneaks in on a
yeah,
biological function, right? So you're
yeah,
like, what's the big
exactly.
deal?
And then you're like, yeah, what's the big deal? It's just part of my natural whatever,
Yeah.
and like then, people get horny. That's
Yeah.
part of your natural thing. So what do you do with that? And it's like,
Yeah.
so people have these habits and they go back to the habit. And the more you have and ingrain the habit too, the more it wires your brain for that habit. And
Yeah. It's going
so
to your
it's a
nervous
natural,
system.
it's your nervous system. So anytime this stuff comes up, and I always use it for every time I got stressed out or overwhelmed, I would go to that as a release,
Yeah.
and so that became part of my escape,
Yeah.
right? So I just keep going back to that. And
What they don't tell you is if you have suffered, I had to figure this out on my own. Like I'm like,
mhm,
wait a minute. It's like that's part of the damage that's done around silence, around sexual abuse and molestation is like your nervous system gets wired for dysfunction. So
yeah,
growing up, I was addicted to really like twisted things and I didn't know why. Like, what's the matter with me? And I'm like, because that trauma is like becomes your attraction point and you're like, oh shit, like I'm actually my brain got wired through trauma to be attracted to things that were hurtful to me. And that's just me. And then you just look at like at the mass population and that people may not even be aware that's happening to them. And how do
yeah.
we how do we heal that?
And the
It's
normalization of it too, when you're around other people, then it's just like everybody's miserable. We don't know why.
yeah. So I mean, this is the crux of the topic today because that is all wired around our life energy and sex energy is life energy. It's sacred life
Absolutely.
force. And then there's so much taboo and demonization and like guilt and shame like around your basic life force. And it's like, good luck, you guys.
Yeah, yeah.
Good
It,
luck digging yourself out of that one. But it's happening. It's happening.
it
So,
is happening.
yeah.
That is the key though, because that sexual energy is your life force. And that's why there's unseen forces always trying to, especially the light workers, right? The people who are on that spiritual path. You get to a certain point and they basically the spotlight's on you and everything else turns towards you. And that's when it can get harder sometimes for people,
Yeah.
So the more light you have, the more things are going to be drawn to you, the more that you might be tested. And so it's really critical to watch how your body energy, your life force energy is being spent or not.
Yeah.
So when I go into meditation and I cultivate this, cultivate the life energy and I move it through my body, my field can get very like palpable. Like other people like around me can like, what is it that you're doing? And they've noticed it. At the same time, though, like um, that's also when I've had like other things try to come in. I'm like, oh, this is interesting. So it's just noticing those things when they're happening, what's happening. And the biggest thing I could say for self-protection is self-awareness.
Oh, yeah.
That's like if you are, and some people like in certain spiritual traditions too, like put the white light around you and this is all they do, like everywhere they go they have this white light, and I don't necessarily subscribe to that either, because what are you doing with that?
Yeah.
um, I know that at one point in my life I used to get in a lot of fights, and I didn't start them, but it was like they found me everywhere I
Yeah.
went,
You're
like
like, come on now.
I
Your energy was attracting. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I was going out and drinking with my friends at the bars at night. We'd go to clubs,
Yeah.
so it was downtown San Diego.
Yeah.
Um, so there was the environment where the things could be attracted to me, and I don't do those things anymore. just kind of outgrew them. But what I found though is that like I've gotten fights all my life up to that point, and I was holding this energy of the need to protect myself. So when I held the energy of the need to protect myself or the ones that I love around me,
Yeah.
it drew the situations to me where that was true. So holding the need to protect myself drew that same situation where I was always defending myself or somebody, and these things came up. When I dropped that, the situation stopped happening, even though I was going to some of the same places, whatnot, and it didn't happen immediately. So that when you release something or clear something, universe does give you shit tests.
Yeah, it's a process. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a process. So like, are you sure? Are you sure? Okay, they got it.
Yeah, of
You know,
awareness, right? You're like,
it's awareness. It's like
uh-huh.
something working itself out of you. It's like making sure you're in alignment to what you say you are. So it is part of our growth. These shit tests, they are for us if you want to look at it that way.
I like that. Shit tests.
Shit tests. But you can think of the same thing if you're going around having this white light and like habitually doing that and thinking that everything is going to infect you or affect you. Uh, I think the biggest thing is to be aware of your own field. You know, I'm an empath too. So I get it when people say I can't go into crowds because it's overwhelming. I do it a little differently in myself because if I feel something, then I'm like, okay, well, somebody's going through something and I clear it in myself. And I know that clearing it myself helps them too. So that's the way I handle it. Sometimes I will take the center of myself and push it out. So I'm purifying everything around me.
Yeah.
So I will do that. But I only do that when it comes up in my awareness that I need to do that, right? So that's part of that self-awareness. When you're self-aware, you're also aware of what your energy centers are doing, what your mind is doing, what your emotions are doing, what's yours or not yours.
Yeah.
And
I'm
so,
learning to listen and trust it.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And then when you act out of alignment, that's what invites Wetiko in.
Yeah.
So being impeccable in thought, word, and deed, right? So
Yes. Yes. And the Four Agreements. I love that book. Do you know
yeah,
that book? Yeah.
yeah, I do know. And
That
impeccable
really,
also doesn't mean, oh, sorry,
oh, I was just going to say that's a really powerful practice.
it is. Yeah. Impeccable also doesn't mean perfect too. So just to clarify for people.
Good point. I think what I determined, like I started practicing just that, like being impeccable. There's those other three. Always do your best, I think, is connected to totally connected to being impeccable with your word. Because if you're always doing your best, you don't have to be perfect, right?
Right.
And you can
Yeah.
just say what's on your heart and trust that that was the right thing to say, even though it might have been messy or didn't sound right.
Yeah. And you could pay attention to what closes you down or what opens you up. That's part of
Hmm.
that impeccability. If I notice that it closes me down, then I might have to revisit that, whatever it is. Sometimes it might have to correct what I say. Or if I'm thinking a thought and I don't check it, maybe it's not even mine.
Exactly. This whole idea that, we live in a field of consciousness and the ideas are already in the field of consciousness. And
Mhm.
our personal frequency depends on what thoughts we have available,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. And your thoughts also help dictate everything unseen around you too. So you're always surrounded by spirits and beings and energy, always, no matter what. We are all connected. And there's so many layers of dimensionality, like everywhere we go. You don't really know what's around you. But your thoughts, your words, your deeds, your energy also helps dictate and determine that.
It's it's true. Like it's true. I mean, I would I wouldn't have believed any of this if I hadn't experienced it myself through
my own, intuitive development and just seeing all of the beings that are in the spaces.
Mm-hmm.
And that can freak people out, because
It does.
yeah, it's fear. It's like a fear
Yeah,
trigger.
it does.
But I
It
don't
freaks
think
people.
it's something to be scared of. I think it's just something to something to be aware of that and it comes down to me to self-sovereignty.
Mm-hmm.
Like when you get to a place where you know your own energy, your own power, then there's nothing really to be afraid of.
Yeah.
What were you going to say before I rudely interrupted you? You were going to say something. Sorry.
Uh, I don't remember,
Okay,
but
it'll come back.
but tagging on what you just said about your own power, like when you are in alignment, when you are acting in alignment with that greater part of yourself, you have access to more of yourself, and that more of yourself, like that who you truly are, is the part of us is always connected to Creator. And when we think about what that is, that energy of Creator, the all that is, it's like all the power of creation. It's all the wisdom of creation. It's all the love of creation. It's all the understanding of creation. It's the alpha and the omega, the beginning and the end. And the only thing that limits all those concepts from us being able to access it is our own human limited understanding, the beliefs and the things that we weave into those. But if you just open up yourself to all possibilities of whatever that is, when you bring that part of yourself into the other places, it will unravel anything that's there. It will unravel anything that you need to undo from yourself. But you have to do it in your conviction, in your commanding. Like I did have an entity possession at one point.
Was this what time of your life was this?
Uh, this was, let's see, I think it was 2011 maybe.
Were you in the was it pre-military or military or post?
No, it was after I came back from Iraq.
Okay.
So I was actually doing contract work, but I came back from Iraq, and that's when a lot of like really interesting things started happening to me in a short time. So this particular one, it happened when I was going out of body a lot. I was doing a lot of astral travel. And some people get scared about astral travel for this very same reason. And to them, I would say that you go in, it's nothing to be scared of, but go in and set your intentions beforehand. Go in and set your like,
Clearly. Yeah, be clear.
yeah, yeah. If you have a fear or something that you feel you need to worry about, call on your guides, your angels, call on like all those helpers so
Jesus
that you,
Cristo.
yeah, yeah, call on Jesus. And the same experience that I had, like I did call on Jesus. So it's, yeah.
Yeah, well,
Um,
that's the high. I mean, that's the high for me. Like, that's the highest frequency of love right there. And it's
definitely,
love.
he embodies that, you know? Um, so in this particular experience though, like during a period of time, I was going out of body and I would find myself in other people's bodies sometimes, which
Oh,
is really
really?
strange. And like I was like,
Okay.
how is this even happening? I don't know, but it was interesting and it was a learning experience for me. So whenever I have questions about things, I tend to get experiences that answers them. And I didn't know
That
how that was
nice.
all connected at this point, but I was going out of body. I ended up in this other person's body, and there was some teenager in it felt like some other realm, like a different parallel reality is what it felt like.
Hmm.
There was another kid there, like, and then when I was in this state too, I could go back and forth between realities really easy. So opening my eyes and closing my eyes. It was fast as blinking, literally as fast as blinking. So I opened my eyes, I was back in my room. I'm like, huh. I closed my eyes, I was over there. And when I was over there, whenever the body I was in would talk, I could hear it echo in my head. So, and then he was like walking around and doing whatever. And I was just kind of like there as a hitchhiker, I guess.
Yeah. It's an
Then,
observer. Yeah.
yeah. But then I was like, I was going back and forth. I'm like, this is really interesting. And I noticed that I could only hear them when my eyes were closed. And I was like, well, what would happen if I closed my eyes and I speak? Would they be able to hear me? And the other kid that was there next to the other kid whose body I was in, he felt very like depressed. He felt very like he didn't have any confidence. The other kid was a bully and he pushed him around.
Yeah.
He had very dark energy, that other kid. And I didn't realize some of the things until after. But so I was closing my eyes and I was like, hello. And then that other kid goes, he turned around and looked at me. He goes, well, hello. And instantly I was back in my body and he was pushing his way into my body.
Oh God. Okay.
And what I got later was that other kid whose body I was in, the other dark one would possess his body and make him do things.
Yeah.
So he was very gifted in that way, but he used it for dark. So he
Yeah.
was possessing my body and pushing his way in, and I stopped him halfway through, and I noticed that like this right side of my body was all paralyzed. I couldn't move anything where he was. And I stopped him, and I was like, well, are you with the light? And I got, no. I'm like, oh, okay.
Are you with the light? No.
No. I'm like, oh, all right. So I was like asking from my heart, right? And so I'm
Yeah.
getting this answer. I'm like, all right, so this is not supposed to happen. No. I'm like, all right, cool. Please get out of my body. Nothing. Okay. Get out of my body now. No. Okay. And when I was talking out loud, but it was paralyzed. So I was like kind of Sylvester Stalloning it, I'm like,
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. So then I was like, okay, I get it. I have to take command. And I command you out of my body now. And then he was gone.
Yeah.
So that right there is part of the lesson. You really have to own and take control of yourself. Afterwards, he was gone. Like I felt all this goo, like these little black spots everywhere he was. It was interesting. But I was so pissed.
Mm-hmm.
I was so pissed at that point. And I was like, well, I'm going to go see the High Council. And it was one of those things that you kind of say.
I'm going to go see the High Council right now.
I was like, oh, I'm mad. How could this happen? I didn't want this to happen. How could this happen? If nothing happens without my say or my allowance or my acceptance on some level, I don't know how this happened. And so I shot out of my body and I'm instantly in this black void. And this man with this really long white hair down to the floor, this long white beard down to the floor, this long white robe, no feet, came floating towards me. And then I'm like telepathically screaming at him, why did this happen? And very calmly, he was like, telepathically, he's like, you wanted this to happen. And I was like, oh. It's like everything I was mad about. And he said that, and I knew it was instantly true. I'm like, oh, back to my body. And then I was trying to clear out the goo. And I couldn't clear it. And so I called on Jesus and Archangel Michael, and I saw them physically appear in the room. And Michael put his sword through me, and I saw all these black spots fly into the sword. And then Jesus was there, and he hit the wall with his little carpenter hammer. I saw this rainbow light reflect off each wall that he hit, and he hit all the walls and the ceiling and the floor, basically fortifying the space so nothing else could come in. And then, like, I felt even better than I did before the whole thing started, when he put his sword through me.
Yeah.
And after that, like I was sitting there in my clarity, and I realized that like a week prior to that, I was sitting there kind of like meditating and contemplating like how possessions even happen in the first place. Like, how does this even happen? If it doesn't happen unless we say it happened, or like accept it or want it on some level, how does this even happen? So that was my contemplation. So here was my answer through this physical experience, and also like how to overcome it. So through this physical experience that I got, it was the answer. You have to take command and control. And then sometimes we opened ourselves in places that we're not aware of, and we just get things and we tend to just accept them. Like if I didn't have any awareness of what I was doing, of myself, I would have known to stop it and go, wait a minute, what is this? So many other people.
Well, you wouldn't have even seen it. You would have just said, why do I feel so bad?
Yeah. And that's a good point too. Why do I feel so bad? So one of the signs that you can look for if you have something affecting you is you get sudden urges or desires and something in your mind or pictures in your mind to do something. And like maybe it feels okay. Maybe the body is like doing some endorphins or something and you go
Yeah.
through with it. And right afterwards, when you're done with that, you instantly feel like shit or you regret it. You're like, what did I just do?
Yeah.
So that's one of those signs that something else is affecting you outside of your own self.
Yes. And the saying that Paul, one of my mentors, who talks a lot he's written a couple books on Wetiko. I told you about him, Paul
Mhm.
Lely. One of his sayings that he shares a lot is, this energy, this Wetiko energy, or this mind virus, or whatever you want to call it, can't take your soul.
Mm-mm.
You actually have to give it to them. And it's usually because you don't know what you're doing. Like, you know what I mean? Can trick
Yeah.
you into appearances. And I guess that's where the whole idea of Satan and the devil comes from. And that's the counterfeit spirit, which he refers to a lot. And it's also in the Bible, right? The counterfeit spirit is that level of consciousness that comes in and I guess the whole idea of like making a deal with the devil is like,
Yeah.
it always has partial truth, but not the whole
And it
enchilada.
always has to have partial truth.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we wouldn't accept it.
Yeah.
Right. So it always involves that. And so getting clarity on discernment on what you're hearing, I think is critically important, especially in these days and age, right? There's so much misinformation out there. There's so much like distraction. There's so much like trying to pull us in different directions. It's really important to pay attention to that.
Yeah, and you also have to be super careful of the frequency of what you're consuming.
Oh,
Uh,
absolutely.
yeah, because it's just like every once in a while, I'll like want to watch a show like on Netflix or something. And like I was watching that show, Black Mirror.
Hmm.
Oh my God, I had to shut that off immediately. I'm like, I'm like, oh my gosh, that was so nasty. Like, I mean, just the topics and it was just like, why would anyone subject themselves to that? For me, it was just like literal, like indoctrination through the screen. I was just like, that's creepy.
Yeah.
But, and to what you were sharing about your experiences and your inquiry into what possession is, and then you actually got to see how it happens. And um, it is through the traumas, the weaknesses, the holes in our energy field, that those images come in on. And once
Mhm.
those images come in on, everything attached to those images energetically get invited into your field. So that's how it happens. You
This
give
is
you, yeah,
exactly why they put people through ritual satanic abuse when they're trying to mold them and shape them into doing things that they want them to do. They wouldn't normally otherwise, you know. So people in the MyLab programs uh, go through that often so that they can have more control over this person and their gifts because they fragment them,
yeah,
right? They fragment them and they put them in this other mind state. So that's why sometimes they can induce multiple personalities in these people, so that they go into that state where part of them is disassociated, and then they'll do these other things that they wouldn't normally.
yeah. Well, the thing is that's really the symptom of like sexual abuse. I mean,
Yeah.
I was sexually abused. My brother was sexually abused in the family unit. And so I'm sure abuser had been abused. And so, and that's just one family. And then you look at the statistics of child abuse, which are horribly underrated because people don't even want to talk about it or even know what it is because they're in trauma and shock, and they're like, I don't want to say that I was sexually abused because then that's true. And children, they don't even know what's happening to them. So that level of trauma, like on a mass level, makes people super vulnerable, disembodied and disconnected to their own nervous system and their own sovereignty, really. And it's at the root, right?
Yeah.
And that's why this topic is so important to me, around this. It makes me, I guess I have a little bit, just a little bit, of it's like once you see that, you can't unsee it. And it's just like a level of grief. And I don't want to say it's hopelessness, because it's definitely not hopelessness, but it's like, oh, oh, wow, what an incredible tool that's been being used on humanity for whatever reason to usurp life force for other purposes of other dimensions and other beings. And so I've come a long way, I was very resentful and very like, la, 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 but I just realized that it's an energy game, and I don't want to say game to like to trivialize it or explain away trauma, not at all, but to empower people to reclaim their own sovereignty and their power. And I guess this leads me to the topic that I want to close with today, which is how this is related to how this shows up for men and how this shows up for women, and this toxic expression of masculinity and femininity. And I don't want to say it's toxic, it's just distorted, because life force is distorted in the body. And so it's like, I don't know about you, but I'd love to hear how you feel in regards to what's happening on the planet, and this, for lack of a better phrase, I'm calling it the reconciliation of the masculine and feminine energy in the psyche. And of course, that appears out in the world like a mirror of how men get to show up in the world and how women get to show up in the world and how they get to connect.
Well, the whole idea of the toxic masculine, I think, has been very much focused on.
Yeah.
But you can't have the toxic masculine without the toxic feminine.
That's right.
So, and even when it looks like the power is imbalanced, because it has been, you have a predominantly masculine driven world in many cases. Like I was just reading about something in Madagascar, where they look at females as less than, right? And so men are honored, and then women are just objectified. And so it's definitely like, but it was toxic it was distorted on both sides. And so they have this completely repressed sexuality. And so they don't even know like what to do with themselves, and they're objectifying the women. So their part of them is not whole. The women is not whole because they're obviously being put in this like lower than, less than realm or box, and they're not allowed to be their full whole self. So really at this point, what I see in the world happening is like I have heard some people like some years ago when this shift began to happen that it's supposed to be the women going to step up and they're going to take over, and we're going to go to a women-led or driven world,
Matriarchal.
matriarchal. We're going to go back to the matriarch, and that's not what we're supposed to do. So you can't bring balance by bringing imbalance. So, but
Amen.
that's what was being happening though. Like the pendulum has swung really hard one way, and now it's trying to swing really hard the other way, which is what you see in the media, and all of this like women empowerment movement. It's swinging the other way, but the goal really is going to be bringing it back in balance, where we are really seeing the equality in one another. Equality, let me clarify that because I've had some people really kick back on that word. That just means having equal value and equal importance. It does not mean same,
Yeah.
you know. So women does not equal men, but equal value, equal importance, equal worthiness.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we really mean by equality. So it's really bringing that back to where we honor one another, really honoring the fullness of one another, honor what we have to bring to one another, what we have to share, to give to one another. And what that means is like the masculine in its divinity, it protects the feminine energy and its divinity. It feeds the creativity and the life force of the masculine. And both of them together, like they've done experiments. And I think I might have mentioned to you before.
I think you did, but I don't remember the details now. Go ahead.
Okay, so they've done experiments, and what they've shown is that when they put a group of men and they were trying to influence a random number generator,
Mm-hmm.
they would influence the direction, but not the intensity, right? And so, like the amount of number generation that goes, it was more like determined on what it would be lower or higher or odd or even, so they would do direction, but not the intensity. And the women were just the opposite. It was the intensity, but not the direction. So it was really like all over the place, but they could feed it this power of their intention. But
Yeah.
obviously, when they put them together, you had direction and intensity. So it doesn't necessarily mean men and women specifically, but it means the masculine energy and the feminine energy, which we all have within us, but obviously it's also more powerful when you get a group of people together.
Yeah, because it's the field
Yeah.
times 10. So this is interesting because I don't know, I think I was talking to my mastermind group, which is women. It's the Invoke Mastermind group. And I was in a women's circle this last week, and I was with 14 women. And I got really present to how unsafe, like, I feel around women.
Mm.
And I didn't even notice that before. Like,
Wow.
I noticed how unsafe I feel around men, you know, but I hadn't noticed that I feel unsafe around these women. And I got, like, because it's so back here, and it got pushed forward. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And it's unconscious holding of other women. Like, they don't have my back. They don't, I can't trust what they're saying. They're not going to show up for me, you know. And once I saw that, of course, I had tons of grief about it because I thought, oh, that's my mom. It's my relationship with my mom. And and why wouldn't a mother be able to be that way for a child, like that emotional support, because she's not that way for herself, you know.
Yeah.
So I saw this dichotomy, like in our culture, which is it's a product of this virus, as far as I'm concerned. It's like you can be like the Kardashians, where like you're just totally focused on, what you look like and your appearance and superficial femininity, cattiness, competitiveness, you know, um, vying for masculine attention and power and status. Or on the other side, you can be like a feminist and, fuck patriarchy, fuck men, and it's like, no, it's not either one of those, you know,
No,
the
it's not.
true feminine. And so then all the sound bites, like in the media, that's the duality, right? That they're focusing on, which is total distraction. Distraction, distraction, distraction. Um, so for me, and I would like to hear about how you address this in your work, is this It's like the internalized, well, it's really like for me, I realized it was the rejection of the feminine, the hatred of the feminine. So that means I have to hate myself on a certain level. I have to hate other women and it's all deeply connected to, gosh, if we just stopped relating to this, like social constructs that keep us disembodied, keep us disconnected from source, because that's her, you know.
So, like, I didn't really grow up with a father, so I didn't have that particular influence. I had a couple stepfathers, but very, they were shorter term in my life.
Yeah, but I mean,
Uh,
that is the influence, right? Absence.
the absence of is the influence. Yes, that is definitely true. Um, and my father, like I, he told me once that when I was in a ceremony, so I was able to talk to my dead father. But he told me that he died so that I could be who I was meant to be. And looking at that side of my family, like looking at like how distorted the masculine is in that side of my family, I know that absolutely to be true.
Say
So
more about that. Like, why would he have to die for you to be like he was?
because I would have been more like him. I would have been like trying to be loyal to my family, or looking after my dad, or just unconsciously following in the footsteps. It would just been an influence. And in being around them, uh, there's certain ways that they're just not healthy.
Yeah, and he didn't
Uh,
have the wherewithal to do his healing.
no, no, he did not have the wherewithal to do his healing. And he had, my mom said he had abilities and gifts, but it freaked him out and spooked him out, so he shut them down. She does too. Um, but he was kind of he was an alcoholic, a little bit of a woman. I'm gonna say a little bit. I think I'm being too kind. He was a womanizer. So yeah. And then when she said though, it's like when he was sober, he actually had a really good heart. He was very loving. So it wasn't all bad, but he didn't have some great traits in there. He was obviously not healed. And then having the wound from the Native American, like what was done to
Genocide.
us as the genocide, what was done to us as a people, and then the loss of our culture and land and like all of that.
Well,
So
also the relationship to the feminine again,
yeah,
Oh my
yeah,
gosh, it's a deep, deep wound. And I just think about alcoholism and drug addiction, especially in the indigenous communities. It's like self-destruct. Um,
yeah, yeah,
and so go
yeah.
ahead. Sorry.
So no, you're right though. There's a lot of that self-destruction, and it's because like of our just we've been broken down systematically over time. Um, and there are people holding on to tradition in their own light in no way, but uh, there is a lot of that systematic breaking down. So this absence of and my own path has been really to question like what is in alignment, what is really me, or what is not me,
Yeah.
and if I'm really embodied in my divinity, like what does that look like? What does that feel like? Like how do I respond authentically from that place? And then noticing like how certain thoughts or behaviors either close me down or open me up. And that's a really good indication of what is really from your divinity or not. If you get a sense of empowerment, but you feel it more in the lower chakras, and this up here closes down, it's a good time to stop and say, where is this really coming from? If I tune into that place and I bring it down in and merge it with the lower energy, do I still have the same inclination or desire? Right. And do I feel as empowered, or do I feel a little bit off? So it's not to say that any one way is the right way or that you should do this, but it really says that you should really check in with yourself to see if that's really true.
Yeah.
Because so much we come from assumptions and just historical behaviors, whether it be inherited from our family or our culture and society and
Expectations.
expectations, all of that.
Yeah, I like that. Like inquire within. Yeah, I don't think a lot of people are raised with that as an option.
No,
It's
no, it's
actually check without. Yeah.
definitely something I had to learn,
Yeah. Yes, my friend. Yeah. So, as we get ready to wrap up our conversation, I just wanted to know if you had anything you wanted to share about your work, or I had forgot to mention this to, well, I did mention it to you actually
Yeah.
about about any offers that you have going on right now or not. You don't have to. I'm just giving you this moment to share anything that you want to share about the work that you're doing with people.
If anybody is interested in finding out more, you could shoot me a message on my website, brandonlapier.com. That's LAPIER.
I'll put it in the notes too.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. I do mentor people on helping them develop their own gifts or get clarity on things. I also help people with experiences of high strangeness. So
Okay,
if you
what?
high strangeness.
Oh, high strangeness. Okay.
Yeah, so basically you have weird dream experiences that you can't explain, astral experiences, paranormal stuff, ET stuff, other things that you don't really have any idea of what's going on. I help people get clarity on those pieces too,
Mhm.
and then help people through trauma. So, and it doesn't matter what you've been through, uh, if you're holding on to it, any kind of emotions or anything like that, there's always a way through that. And so I've helped people through some very traumatic things, being trafficked, and sold by their father, that kind of thing. So there's always a way through.
Soul healing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Soul recovery.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I so appreciate that because I know so many people have experiences and they don't really have anybody to talk to about what they've gone through, so they just get shoved and
Yeah.
pushed on the edge. And it's like, no, that's spirit, right? Asking you to wake up, show up, and get your assignment.
Hmm. And then like when you think about why was this done or why did I have to go through this, like you mentioned before, looking at it like a game and then but not diminishing the
The real
trauma of the
impact.
experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. On a spirit level, we did choose this. Like my possession that I mentioned earlier, on a spirit level, I did choose it because I asked the question.
Mhm.
So not only was this calling from spirit, but it's also the power of our words, power of our intention. Something to remind people of too is like that saying from the Emerald Tablets is darkness transmuted becomes the light of the light.
Yeah.
So we go through these experiences so that we can be that lighthouse for others. And whether, no matter what was done to you, or what you've been through, you can be radiant on the other side of it.
Yes, and that I love that quote that you have shared before. I think you actually shared it on our last
Oh,
podcast, and I love it because it's so powerful. Because I think sometimes people forget why they're doing the healing work that they're doing. It is personal, but it's also not personal at all. It's like lifting and raising consciousness itself. And um, that made me think of something that just went out of my brain right now. I hate that when that happens. Gosh, what was it? transmuting, light of the light. What? I can't remember. It was really good too. Got a lot going on. It'll come back, and maybe I'll add it to the end later. People are like, "What is it? What is it?" I don't know, but yeah, it's definitely important. Work. Oh, I remember now. See, I knew it would come back.
Ding.
I was thinking about like when you were speaking about like the entities and learning, like we were talking about learning to know your own energy and claiming sovereignty and how important that is. And it's like everything's connected. And it was just like, yeah, it's like, that's the quantum field, everything is part of our consciousness. It's not coming from outside of us. It's something in our awareness that's asking to be seen, healed, released, let go, witnessed. Sometimes things just want to be seen. And then they're like, oh, okay.
Absolutely. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes it just takes that holding presence and awareness in that spot. And I've had this with a lot of different clients, and just going into that place that they've been blocking or pushing down and holding space for that emotion that they didn't want to face. And then it begins to dissolve. So it's just being seen is a lot of times the key. And when it's not, that means there's some other attachments or beliefs that we have to look at also.
And shift out. Yeah.
Being aware of what other things come in when you're holding that space for that is super important.
Yeah. And that's why I like to think of like, the metaphor of the house. It's like, we are the host, we are the temple, we are the house. And if we don't know where the front door is or the back door is or what windows we left open, it's anybody's house, right? We can come in, especially if we haven't learned to command our sovereignty in our psychic space.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much, Brandon, for sharing all of your wisdom and your insight. And I will include all of your information in the description of this podcast. So if you are wanting to find out more about Brandon, you can. All right. Until next time, until our next exciting adventure. Bye for now.
Thanks again for having me.
Yeah. You are so welcome.